Well, Martha, it's December. Have you your Christmas tree up? The First Lady has hers up at the White House.
Do you know what? I saw that she was putting the Christmas tree up at the White House, and it reminded me of that leaked videotape. I don't know whether you remember from 2018. It's hilarious. And Melania caught saying, "Who gives an F about Christmas?" And she's talking about working her ass off, putting up Christmas decorations.
I'm working like a my ass off. I know. That Christmas stuff that, who gives a about Christmas stuff and decoration.
I'm taking a leaf out of the First Lady from 2018's book, and I'm not bothering with a tree because I'm going back to the UK, and I just don't think it's going to get the right amount of appreciation. So I am going Melania 2018 and not bothering with the Christmas tree this year, David. Does that make me the Grinch?
To some extent, perhaps, but we'll trust you to hang a few Christmas lights on your surfboard in LA, Martha. I'm David Blevins in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Martha Kellner in Los Angeles.
It's December, so it's getting colder and darker here in the capital. And is there a cloud looming over the Secretary of War? Questions are being asked amid reports Pete Hegseth gave the order to kill everybody on board a boat from Venezuela.
Plus, in the wake of the shooting in DC of the two National Guardsmen, Donald Trump stops processing new visas for people arriving from Afghanistan and starts reviewing the status of those already here. It's a sweeping new immigration crackdown.
And we look at the latest flashpoint between Donald Trump and female journalists. So, Martha, right in the middle of our Thanksgiving break, last Friday, the Washington Post published this story that has caused a real stir. According to Post sources, Pete Hegseth, the one-time news anchor now in charge of the world's most powerful army, ordered his Joint Special Operations Commander to kill everybody, to leave no survivors, launching a second strike on a boat that was already incapacitated to kill the last two survivors who were clinging onto the wreckage.
Yeah, just to explain the backstory to this a little bit, the Department of Defence, now known as the Department of War, has been shooting boats out of the water, which it alleges are full of traffickers, and that's been happening for months now. The story which the Washington Post published on Friday relates to a specific boat bombing which happened on September the 2nd this year. That's the first of what has now become this regular occurrence. There have now been strikes on 21 other boats, 83 people killed in the process. 3 people have survived these strikes. And this is all part of President Trump's effort, he says, to stop these boats entering the United States and to deter others from undertaking that journey. So these boat bombings, the administration insists, are about preventing drugs arriving in the US by sea.
Initially, Trump distanced himself from these reports that Hegseth had issued what's called a double-tap strike.
Yeah.
And he said that he had great confidence that his war secretary did not order a second strike, before adding, "I wouldn't have wanted that, not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine." Now, Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, was asked about this story during Monday's press conference.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And I would just add one more point to remind the American public why these lethal strikes are taking place. Because this administration has designated these narco-terrorists as foreign terrorist organizations. The president has a right to take them out if they are threatening the United States of America and if they are bringing illegal narcotics that are killing our citizens at a record rate, which is what they are doing. And under the previous administration, there was enough fentanyl trafficked into our country to kill every American man, woman, and child many times over. And so that's why you've seen a drastic difference in this administration's policy with respect to the last, and it's one of the many reasons the American public re-elected this president and support this Secretary of War in conducting these strikes.
In fact, the issue dominated the press briefing. Caroline Levitt was asked about it no fewer than 10 times. Martha, we know she's usually incredibly self-assured, speaking confidently off the cuff. So I found it really interesting that she read the same pre-prepared statement over and over again in response to those questions.
Yeah, I found it curious too, David, how many times Admiral Bradley, a man who no one here has ever heard of, was suddenly being mentioned in this press briefing, as opposed to Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, with whom you'd imagine the buck stops with issues like this. And, there are suggestions being made that, this would amount to an extrajudicial killing, even a war crime. Tim Kaine, who's a Democrat senator from Virginia, he appeared on Face the Nation, which is one of the big Sunday morning breakfast programs here. And he said in his estimation that this action, this double tap strike, could be a war crime.
If that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war, as well as international laws about the way you treat people who are in that circumstance. And so this rises to the level of a war crime if it's true.
Martha, this all comes, of course, as tensions between the United States and Venezuela escalate. On Saturday, Donald Trump said he had closed the airspace over Venezuela. But on Sunday, he confirmed that he'd actually spoken to the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. He was asked about that call while returning to Washington from Florida on Air Force One.
The New York Times reported that you had a phone call with Maduro. Did you?
I don't want to comment on it. The answer is yes.
And can you tell us a little bit?
No, I can't do that.
What did you say? Would you say it went well?
I wouldn't say it went well or badly. It was a phone call.
The Miami Herald is now reporting that he gave the Venezuelan leader an ultimatum. To resign immediately, to accept safe passage out of the country, or face escalating US pressure. And that includes the potential, of course, for military action.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are expecting this to ramp up, perhaps with strikes inside Venezuela. The question is, if that does happen, what would be the timeline? And on Monday evening, Donald Trump held a meeting at the White House with the National Security Council about the next steps on Venezuela. Meanwhile, these questions continuing to mount about whether the military under the Department of War Secretary Pete Hegseth is exceeding its lawful authority. So, David, the US is claiming at the moment that blowing these boats to smithereens is all about targeting drug traffickers. Well, cynics might look at that and respond with, if that is the case, President Trump, then why on Friday did you announce that you were granting a full and complete pardon to Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is the former president of Honduras, who is a man suspected of partnering with some of the world's most prolific drug traffickers, a man who once allegedly said, let's stuff the drugs right up the noses of those gringos. And those are not my words, that's not my reporting. That's an official report from the United States Department of Justice website about this man. And he has been sentenced last year to 45 years in prison for conspiring to transport tons and tons of cocaine through Honduras into the US. So if that is what your Department of Justice has determined that he is, a man who facilitated, huge amounts of drugs flooding over the border, why are you now saying that he was treated very harshly and unfairly in his conviction? It definitely, lays the ground to suggestions of hypocrisy on the part of the US president. Donald Trump's also been praising Nasri Asfura, who is the leader of the right-wing National Party in Honduras. And he says that if Asfura, who is his preferred candidate, doesn't win in the upcoming Honduran elections, votes being counted as we record, then he will cut aid to the Central American country. And, I think it just gives rise yet again to the question, is this really about drugs or is it about something else?
The administration says the move is to right the wrongs of the Biden administration and claims the conviction of Hernandez was over prosecution. But the pardoning of the former president has definitely drawn criticism from both sides of the political aisle on Capitol Hill. They're asking, how can you pardon a convicted drug dealer while you are bombing people whom you allege to be drug dealers? That is a conflicting signal, to say the least.
David, since we last recorded the podcast on Thursday morning, there have been significant developments in the tragic shooting of those two National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. We now know their names, two soldiers from West Virginia, Sarah Beckstrom and Andrew Wolf. And on Thursday, very sadly, Sarah Beckstrom died from her injuries. She was only 20 years old, an unimaginable tragedy. Meanwhile, Andrew Wolf, only 24 himself, still fighting for his life. We're also learning, aren't we, more about the suspected killer?
That's right. Ramonella Lakhanwal, the 29-year-old Afghan arrested for the shootings, has now been charged with first-degree murder. We now know that he left Afghanistan in 2021 as part of President Biden's efforts to relocate Afghans who had helped the US to escape retribution from the Taliban. But before coming to the US in 2021, he had served in one of Afghanistan's elite counter-terrorism units. His unit was operated by the CIA and fought the Taliban on behalf of the US government.
Yeah, Lakhanwal actually lived in Washington state. There's a fairly sizable Afghan population there. It's right across the country, about as far away from Washington, D.C. as you can get. So he actually drove for 2 days before committing this awful attack. And I think what we've seen here over the last few days is this collision of some of the main tenets of Donald Trump's presidency. So, his constant, unremitting criticism of of the former president Joe Biden, his hate of these forever wars, and his decision to put National Guard on the streets in Washington D.C. and elsewhere, and his anti-immigration policy. So a lot of that drama is coming together in this story. And in the wake of the shooting, President Trump announced he was stopping issuing new visas to anyone from Afghanistan. And remarkably, he signaled that he would also review the visas of those who are already in the country. So that includes, as you mentioned, David, those who helped America during the war in Afghanistan. So a lot of Afghan people were really instrumental to how the US operated on the ground for so long there, and obviously have no connection to the crime that happened last week. This feels like a major new front in immigration policy, doesn't it? We've seen the ICE raids, but this feels like something very different. And as you'd imagine, Caroline Levitt asked about it in the press conference, but didn't really shed much new light on how it will work, because if they start retrospectively revoking visas and green cards to people already here, that's certainly going to be subject to legal challenges in the courts.
Yes, and Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, a man who has become very prominent in this administration, used some really emotive language about all of this in response to a post suggesting collective punishment of Afghans for the violent actions of one man won't make America safer. He called that the great lie of mass immigration. You're not just importing individuals, you are importing societies, he said, adding no magic transformation occurs when failed states cross borders. At scale, migrants and their descendants recreate the conditions and terrors of their broken homelands.
Yeah, a jaw-dropping statement, David, from Stephen Miller, who himself is the great-grandson of Russian immigrants. And, this is a country built on immigrants, built on, the system of immigration and all the richness and the brilliance that brings. And, this is also a White House which is keen not to dwell on the fact that this man, the suspected killer, Lacanwell's asylum application was actually only approved in April of this year. So, in other words, under the Trump administration. Just before we go, David, I don't know whether you've seen, but the White House has opened a new website page. It is whitehouse.gov/media bias. Enjoy.
Yes, yes. On Friday, this page popped up on the official White House website devoted to naming and shaming media outlets and reporters that publish stories it disagrees with. The first quote-unquote offenders for the inaugural week of the platform, CBS, the Boston Globe and the Independent.
It has been said that, this might be a bit of a badge of honour. There is a serious point to all this, though, and it's that idea that if you put enough pressure on people and organisations, they may, they may choose to report information in a certain way so not to provoke a reaction. So, for instance, the administration today have pointed a finger at those three outlets that you mentioned because they say they misrepresented the president's call for those Democratic lawmakers, Senators Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin, that they misrepresented the president's call for them to be hanged after they published that video saying that military personnel should not follow illegal orders. So, there is a question about, what effect this will have on journalists and how they operate.
Yes, it is that age-old balance between holding power to account and having the access in order to do that. The website also includes an offender hall of fame or shame, some people might say, featuring the Washington Post, CNN and others, showing a database of news articles the White House says are fake news. And those include the names of the reporters who wrote them and categories of offence. The categories being bias, lie or left-wing lunacy.
Yeah, there's nothing new, is there, in that language that Donald Trump's using. We've heard him, calling out fake news, left-wing lunacy, bias, lies for years now. This is just the latest example of them weaponising sort of the official apparatus of the White House to attack journalists. And I think it's ramped up over the last couple of weeks, certainly. We were talking last week about Donald Trump calling that female journalist, Piggy, saying, "Be quiet, Piggy." And on Sunday night, when he was flying back to Washington from his Thanksgiving holidays, you might have imagined he'd be relaxed after taking a few days off. Well, no, because he was being questioned by a couple of female reporters and was not exactly polite to them.
What, releasing?
No. What part of your body was the MRI looking
I
at?
have no idea. It was just an MRI. What part of the body? It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing. Goodbye, everybody. You too.
And that wasn't the only time he was rude to a female journalist over the weekend. On Friday in Mar-a-Lago, he called a reporter stupid for asking questions about the shooting in DC.
Your DOJ IG just reported this year that there was thorough vetting by DHS and by the FBI of these Afghans who were brought into the U.S. So why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let them in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person.
We know that Donald Trump has a history of these bad-tempered run-ins with women, journalists or otherwise, David. But it is interesting that it does seem over the last, few days and weeks to be him going up against female reporters and being very demeaning towards them. I've seen him go up against male reporters as well, of course, but he doesn't use that, that debasing language, focusing on their looks, on their intelligence. There does feel like there's something more sinister going on here.
Yes, Martha, and we'll have lots of opportunities to monitor how the president is engaging with female journalists in particular. Caroline Levitt says we're going to see Donald Trump every single day this week. So thanks so much, Martha. If you have a question, write to us at Trump100@Sky UK. We're always very glad to receive your correspondence.
Thank you very much for listening as ever, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
See you then.